All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our University Place Public Safety Listening Forum. I'm Greg Primo, your Chief of Police here in University Place. I just want to say welcome and thank you for being here on such a beautiful day. to those that are here in person and also those that are online watching via the internet. So thank you to all of you for being a part of this. Like I said, this is a listening session is what we're calling these. So the idea is to get some feedback from citizens around public safety in University Place. Give us your ideas, your thoughts. I am going to start with a presentation of about 10 or 12 slides. The idea is I'm going to go through the presentation and save questions for the end because I want to be respectful of people's time. Some people who just want to hear the information and they may have to get out of here or something. So we're going to go through the presentation, hold your questions for the end, and then we'll try and cover everything at that point. So it should just take me about 10 or 15 minutes to get through that presentation. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started with the presentation. University Place, the City Council back in January had a goals retreat, and they came out of that session with their number one priority as being public safety and how do we address some of the lack of our resources in public safety here in University Place. And they tasked staff with doing some community outreach and getting some feedback from the citizens around public safety. The step one was we hired a research firm, EMC Research, to conduct a community survey, so a scientific poll around public safety. And that was done in the end of March 31st timeframe, where they interviewed. It was about a 10 to 12 minute long survey where they interviewed residents around public safety and to get their feedback. So the first, go ahead and go to the next slide for me. And if you can follow, here's our slides. So this is one of the questions that was asked on that survey, is what do you think is the most important problem facing University Place today? This was an open-ended question, so these weren't multiple choice where people chose from it. This is what came off the top of their head as what was the most concerning issue for them. And as you can see, number one was crime and drugs as being the number one concern. Traffic and congestion was number two, which is, I could say, is still related to public safety. But from this, it really kind of identified what some of the concerns are within the community. I won't read through each one of those, but you can see that there's a little bit of a wide gap in terms of responses, but overwhelmingly pushing at 50% there is around public safety. Go ahead to the next slide. So as we're looking at University Place in specific, but these numbers are not unique to University Place. If you've been watching the news, property crime is a challenge regionally. If you've seen it, other jurisdictions are being faced with the same challenges around increases in property crime. For University Place, we don't have the violent crime issues that a lot of other jurisdictions are facing. Our violent crime numbers are very relatively low for our population, and those have remained fairly flat over the last several years. But property crime is where we're seeing the most of our impacts. These numbers here for 2022 is a projection number. So based on January through April, we took actual incidents and then projected that out to the end of the year. So you can see that we're trending at a much higher rate than previous years. Again, that's our biggest challenge in University Place, our property crime. So this is your vehicle prowls, vehicle thefts, just general thefts, porch pirates, shoplifting, those types of incidents. So we're trying to address how do we address property crimes into the future. Go ahead to the next slide. So this chart is going to talk about the number of dispatched calls per officer. So a dispatched call is a citizen calling into 911 and sending the officer. This is not officers' self-initiated activity, so traffic stops, follow-up investigations, or suspicious person type of contacts. We took just the total number of dispatched calls and divided by the number of total officers within the agency. And you can see that our officers are handling a higher number of calls per officer in comparison to a lot of other agencies in this area. We currently are staffed with 16 total commissioned officers in University Place for a city of 35,000 residents. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So another big question that has come up through these forum sessions is how do we pay for public safety? And we put this information up here to show you where your property taxes go. So in the city of University Place, 100% of your property tax goes to pay for public safety resources. Now, the issue is only 6 cents on the dollar, so every dollar of your property tax, only 6 cents of it goes to the city. Now, they dedicate all of that to public safety, but as you can see, a very small portion of your property tax is what's going to the city. Go ahead to the next slide. Talking about what your property taxes have been and where it goes. As you can see from this chart, from incorporation, the beginning of incorporation back in 1996, you can see that bottom line is what you've paid, the average homeowner has paid to the city in property tax, and that's what's dedicated to public safety here. The other ones is giving you an idea of the fire department and the school district, where those other monies go. Those are all based off of voter-approved levies and bonds, and how those also reflect your property value increases and the increases in your property taxes. Let's go ahead and go to the next. Thank you. So now we'll talk about specifically this proposal that the council is considering. What will this cost me? The average homeowner, it's $2.67 per month. Per month for every 100,000 in homes assessed value. So the average UP home is assessed at $525, and so this would be about $14 a month. Go ahead to the next slide. So now we're going to talk about what the proposal is and what this money is going to cover. So the first part is we're looking at improving our criminal investigations division. So right now I talked about we have 16 officers assigned, commissioned staff assigned to University Place. We have 1 investigator for the city, and they're primarily tasked with dealing with property crimes. And as we are seeing a trend increasing in property crimes, we need to be focusing on how do we address those issues of increased property crime activity, and that is increasing our criminal investigations abilities. One of the things that I like to point out here at University Place is that we try to address even vehicle prowl crimes. A lot of agencies, because they're tackling larger issues, violent crime, incidents and whatnot, we try to take some of our resources and address that lower level thing, that vehicle prowl. And so when there is a vehicle prowl and somebody's wallet is taken and there's a fraud that occurs at a store here in University Place from that theft, we're trying to conduct a follow-up, see if there's video, try and track down suspects from that. The idea behind that is if we can get these suspects knowing that we're actually doing follow-up on that, not only maybe we'll catch them and put them in jail where they belong, but it's going to deter that activity from them coming back to University Place. But still, with only 1 investigator assigned and the amount that it's increasing, we feel that we need to up our criminal investigations here within the city to try and address that rise in property crimes. In addition to that component of addressing property crimes, it's going to allow us to even look at bigger crimes. So currently, University Place is a contract with the Sheriff's Department. So all of our major violent crime issues go down to the Sheriff's Department Investigations Division. And what happens if we have a shooting incident that goes down to criminal investigations for the Sheriff's Department and gets put in their pile of all the other incidents across the county. And so their limited resources, then our incident gets prioritized based off of all their other incidents and their availability to investigate those. So the idea is if we can increase our resources here within the city, we can prioritize what cases get handled, even those violent crime incidents that the Sheriff's Department is not able to pick up because of their limited resources. And again, not only is it the ability to do those in-house, but we'll have the ability to do more complex cases versus just having that 1 investigator trying to maintain those. Let's go on to the next slide. So of course, one of the core functions of a police department is patrol. The officers in uniform, the officers in a patrol car out responding to 911 calls and addressing that, being a visible police presence within our city. That is just the fundamental function of law enforcement. And so we're adding patrol officers and targeting them to our busiest shift, which is around the swing shift time frame, to increase our ability to respond to calls in a timely manner, having that police availability. Right now we operate with 2 officers on duty at a time. And if you think about law enforcement calls, a vast majority of our calls, roughly about 85 to 90%, require 2 officers to respond. So if you have 2 officers on one call, we don't have anybody else that's available for any other call that comes in. An example that I give that I think all of us can maybe relate to is a 5 o'clock in the afternoon, 27th and Bridgeport collision. It happens fairly often. You've probably seen collisions along Bridgeport. Well, I have 2 officers that are working. One's got to go there to try and do the investigation, and the other officer is going to be trying to manage the traffic on a busy, commute time through our city. We don't have any other resources to handle the calls at that point. Now, in comparison to some other cities where their call volume is a little bit lower, they can probably handle that. The likelihood of additional calls coming in during that time is probably lower, so they can handle that lower staffing. Our call volume is such that we need additional resources to ensure that we have the availability of officers to respond to additional calls. Again, it's about availability, it's about the visibility, and it's enhancing the safety within the community. Just having more police presence, the ability to respond, it enhances officer safety as well. So we don't have officers even by themselves going to calls that require 2 officers. As much as we advocate that they need to evaluate, slow down, take their time to evaluate calls, so many of them want to go in even when it's by themselves, and we want them to hold back and wait for that backup. Now, we do have a mutual aid response. So, for example, Furcrest, on a very regular basis, will come over and assist University Place officers on calls. That's a very common occurrence. And the same for us. If we have an officer available and they have a call, we will assist them as well. If it's a major incident, that's where you get multi-jurisdictional things. So if you had a major shooting incident or an active shooter type situation, you're going to have agencies from all over coming to help stabilize the situation, and then it kind of is the responsibility of the jurisdiction to handle the rest of the call. But still on those kind of day-to-day activity, we can't rely on a Furcrest or a Stillicum or another agency to be sending us their officers to back up our one officer on a call on a regular basis, which occurs a little bit more frequently than we would like. Go ahead to the next slide. So traffic enforcement. This is the number one complaint that I receive as your chief, is related to traffic enforcement. The speeding, collisions, hit and run investigations. Those are the number one complaint that I receive. And right now with our staffing, we don't have any dedicated traffic enforcement in the city. We have patrol officers, and then we have an investigator. And we don't have any additional officers available for specialized assignments or those types of things. So in this proposal, we're looking at adding dedicated traffic enforcement. We would put them on the day shift time. So if you recall in the previous one about patrol, we were moving those 2 officers to swing shift. These 2 officers we would be looking at putting on day shift. So yes, they'd be focusing on traffic enforcement, but they're still a uniformed officer in a marked patrol car that can assist with patrol functions. So if those 2 officers are busy on one call and another call comes in, they can respond to that 911 call, but their emphasis is on traffic enforcement. So they're not handling more routine calls. Instead, they're going to be dedicated to doing some traffic enforcement, doing some radar enforcement on different roads and whatnot within our community. So that's the idea behind those additions. And go ahead with the last. So this last piece, over the last couple of years, we have talked about internally, what kind of staffing do we need moving into the future? And we've had, communications with the public about what the needs are, and we've evaluated what we feel that the needs are, and we've looked at this position. What we're calling at this point is a community outreach officer position. So this is not a fully commissioned law enforcement officer. They have a limited commission by the city to, write parking tickets or issue citations under the city code, but really their main focus is around some of this outreach components. So doing some crime prevention education with our businesses, with our homeowners associations, with individual homeowners, to talk about how we can do some prevention around property crimes and what we can do there. Also providing some of that alternative response to low-level issues. So this is where we're looking at panhandling, the homeless individuals that we might see, sleeping in the parks or something. Looking at probably a more appropriate response to those types of issues in terms of sending that fully commissioned patrol officer to deal with that. Again, redirecting or reusing that time instead of sending that officer who could be answering 911 calls or being proactive in some way, having another city resource that can go and connect with these people and offer out other resources that are available to them within our community. So, and then the other component is just having this be a city employee that can do patrols in our parks, and other community areas, just as showing a city presence and kind of being that liaison kind of conduit between issues that are out there in the community and with patrol. So this would be, again, a city employee, but somebody that is on our police radio as they're assessing calls that they're going to. If they need a fully commissioned officer, they can call them on the radio to come and assist them on that and kind of basically hand that call over to the officer if it seems that it's deemed necessary. Let's go to the next slide. I think, how did I do? About 15 minutes or so? 19? Okay. So that was the goal, is to get everybody through. That's kind of the general of my presentation. I'm sure there were some questions, and that's why we wanted to get through those things. Maybe I answered some of your questions, but if not, feel free to ask those questions. Those that are online, I think they can email that email address, and we have that to be able to monitor as well. So I'll go ahead and open it up to anybody here. Yes, sir, you have a question?
Chambers Crest Homeowners Association, which is off of Chambers Lake, as you probably know. The question I have is not necessarily relative to law enforcement, but my concern has been for a number of years is the overhanging trees on Chambers Lane, particularly on the, well, that would be the east side. The west side of the street, the utility companies take very good care of those trees because they're trying to save their power lines and so forth. But 20 years that I've lived in the area, these trees have gotten old. They're hanging well over, even extending past the center line of the road. And you may recall a number of years ago, some branches fell on some cars in Gig Harbor and somebody was killed. And I expressed interest probably a year or two ago about these overhanging trees. These limbs are not being cut down. And I got basically a form letter back saying that the city's safety officer was monitoring that situation. But as I say, I don't see any improvement in these overhanging trees, which to me represent a serious problem from a traffic point of view, but from a driver or passenger in an automobile that gets a heavy branch fall.
Okay, Ed, I don't know if everybody online can get it. The question, or more of a statement, was around some trees down on Chambers that are overhanging the roadway, and obviously that's not a police issue that we deal with, and that was more of a public works thing to address, and we can certainly pass on that message to them.
The person I should direct my issue to?
The public works division of the city would handle all that. They handle the roads and anything related to the roads. Yeah.
If you want to
And-
just email this address up here, I'll make sure it gets where it needs to go.
Yeah, if you want to, we can certainly pass it on. If you email us, we can pass that on for sure. Okay. Yeah, thank you. Yes? Am I supposed to hand this off?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I guess I have to hand it off.
I just wanted to let you know that on the evening of June 6th or the early morning hours of June 7th, between Grandview and Elwood, my catalytic converter was stolen off my car. And my around the corner neighbor on Elwood also had his catalytic converter stolen off his car. So that meant, you know, all the stuff with insurance companies. But I went to report it, and I got a recording telling me to do it online. So I went through that, tried to submit it. It didn't work the first time, so I had to go back to it. But the fact that I was told just to submit that online sent me a message that it wasn't very important. So it caused me a lot of trouble. My neighbor is 90, and he is having a hard time dealing with it. I don't have a garage to my house, so my only option is to park it in my driveway. I since had a supposed anti-theft device put on the replacement catalytic converter, but I still don't feel safe, to tell you the truth. So I guess I'm just asking, does something like that, I know you listed it as property crimes, but the message to me as a citizen is, so what?
Thank you. So that brings up a couple of things. You know, back to, well, one, catalytic converter theft. So that is a property crime, and that is a challenge that's facing a lot of this region, right? It's not just a University Place issue. Talking about the online reporting. So currently we offer online reporting for a lot of property crime issues where there's no suspect information. Personally, I'm not a fan of online reporting, but I understand that it can be a convenience for some citizens because they can do it on their own time. They don't have to wait for an officer to make contact with them. But understand that even though it's an online report, it still goes to us. It's reviewed by a supervisor. Each of those cases are evaluated to whether or not we can conduct follow-up. But yes, when the city was formed, you know, back in 1995 and then 96, you started your own police department. We had a motto that was no call too small. That when you called 911, you called for the police, you were going to get an officer that responded. Your police staffing was also 25 commissioned staff at that time. And in 2009, during that recession period, we cut 9 officers, about 40% of across the board, right? It wasn't just law enforcement. The city was faced with having to make drastic cuts in all services. So adjustments have had to be made over the years with how we allocate the time of the officers. And one of those is coming up with an online reporting or even a telephone reporting option. Again, in my perfect world, I don't really, I like the officer interaction. I think it ensures that we're getting all the information we need to determine if we can do follow-up, because not every citizen knows how to write a police report and what information they need to put in there. We still do evaluate that report. Like I said, a supervisor is reviewing it to see if there's additional information that we need to reach out for. But that's where we're at. There was one other comment that you made. Maybe I'll come to it later. So any other questions? Sorry. Yeah. Oh, you're loud enough. All right. I think, did we turn this off? It's within the room. Okay.
All right, so I want to address the increasing in taxes.
Okay.
To do it. I'm not opposed to public safety. I'm not opposed to law enforcement. Brother-in-law recently retired from Pierce County Sheriff's Office. All that good stuff. You've been here how long? How many years?
As chief, 3.5, just over 3.
Do you know what was the population when we became a city versus what it is now? Because it says here that the population is, we've added 3 times the number of new residents compared to the previous decade. I always remember UP's population being like 30,000 years and years, 20, 30 years ago. Now you're saying it's 35,000. So what was it, say, 10, 20 years ago? Does anybody know?
At incorporation, I want to say it was only like 28,000 or so.
About 7,000, 8,000.
Correct.
Okay, so new residents, are those new residents paying property taxes?
I would assume so.
So shouldn't the additional property taxes that the new residents are paying go to additional public safety and cover that there to be able to hire additional officers? Because what I would like to see is basically being a net zero. In other words, sure, we do all that, but let's cut back somewhere else so we don't pay more property taxes. We also have a number of multifamily units in here. Are those people paying property taxes? Or is it strictly the landlords that are paying the property taxes? Because the people living in those multifamily units or single family that are renting, they're using these services. So shouldn't they be responsible for taking on some of the financial burden for that?
Okay. So the questions around property tax. I got my back up.
Very long and complicated question.
And multifaceted. So if I missed part of it, remind me what it was. All right. So
I'm just new here too. I don't.
Sure. I am Eric Faison. I'm the assistant city manager, and one of my responsibilities is over the finance department of the city. So back when we incorporated, the city incorporated under a different model where the city council could increase property taxes by, I think it was 6% a year. Now it's 1% a year. And if anyone knows anything about inflation over time, our costs, just like everyone else's costs, are increasing by more than 1%, whether it be health care, salaries, whatever it may be, gasoline for the police cars. So the fact that we, have grown by, I guess actually if you take 7,000 people divided by 28, we've grown by a quarter, right? Our budgets have not grown by that much. So when we did the cuts, because there was a time period, I don't know if all of you remember Town Center. Town Center was going to rescue the city's finances. We were going to have fancy retail stores here. We built this garage, and all of that was going to happen, and that would save the city. We would have growth paying for police, paying for... Right. So it didn't pan out. So in 2009, recession, the developer went away. We cut our expenditures, as the chief mentioned, police as well as all the other expenditures. And right now, for the most part, we are doing things that are legally mandated. People can point to, yes, we have flowers along Bridgeport. I can tell you that won't pay for 1/4 of one officer. So we do a few things to beautify, but for the most part, we are responding to public records requests. We are doing our financial reporting and responsive to the auditor. We have legal requirements on the timeframes in which we process permits. All of these things that most people probably aren't using and don't really see as a service, but they're all legally mandated. So that's the first thing that we have to do is comply with all of our legally mandated things. Second thing we have to do is pay for the debt service for this garage, all the other things that we accumulated before the Great Recession. So if you take out all of those things, you're left with other things that we consider essential but aren't mandatory. Police being one of them. By law, we have to have a police chief. By law, we don't have to have any other police officers. But obviously that is an important service. By law, we could have dirt roads. No requirement that our roads be paved or maintained. But we do those things. So if you look at our budget, Public Safety Fund is almost 40% of our operating budget. Maintaining our roads is another big chunk. There's not extra money where we could say, okay, we're going to cut somewhere else and we're going to add officers so there's a net zero. It won't happen. It just won't. We can all wish that it would, but it won't. We're at a stage where we're just trying to maintain the officers we have. And with that 1% increase in property tax every year, that alone is a big challenge. So there's no guarantee over time we're going to keep those. As it relates to apartments,
It could be duplexes or somebody just renting a single-family residence.
it could be a single-family house. Everyone pays property taxes. If the homeowner goes bankrupt and goes away, then whoever owns the property after that, they're paying property taxes. Renters pay property taxes through their rent. So landlords landlords try to make a profit, right? So they're not paying property taxes and not passing that cost along to renters. Everyone pays property taxes, businesses, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope did that answer all of the questions?
So what I'm hearing you say is a multi-family apartment complex.
Mm-hmm.
The owner of that, the property taxes are going to increase by the exact same amount as it will for me as a homeowner, and how that landlord wants to recoup that expense is up to him or her.
Correct. And I don't know a landlord that doesn't include that in the rent,
Okay,
right? All of their expenses go to the
I'm just trying
rent.
to say, okay, how can we try and be creative so to minimize the impact on increasing property taxes along with everything else that has increased? And no offense to anybody, but just looking, it looks like just about everybody in here is like me, and most people retired and on fixed incomes, and we're not going to get our increases for cost of living until next year, yet the expenses are going up now.
I can tell you, people who are salaried, we too are getting increases commensurate with inflation. I would love to get a 9-10% raise. Wouldn't that be awesome? I don't think any of us are. Amanda, could you put up the chart that shows the local government property taxes? So the one right after the dollar bill. So this chart shows you in local, because everyone complains about their property taxes, right? So we have no control over what the state's going to do. That's a whole different government. In terms of the local governments, you see this chart shows at that particular year, what was the average property value at that year paid based off the taxes associated with that jurisdiction. So you can see over time, there hasn't been a huge increase in what's going towards police. What has increased is the amount going to jurisdictions that voters voted to increase. So the school district and the fire district, they didn't just increase at those rates just because those districts said, hey, we're going to raise your taxes. Everyone, the voters, had the ability to raise taxes, and they chose to do so. So the city has not, I don't know, you take this as a positive or a negative, the city has not participated in that process. So when you're looking at, are there other places where there are opportunities to balance your personal checkbook, I would argue that the city isn't the first place I would look. And I'm not encouraging people to not vote for police, or not vote for fire, or not vote for school, because those are important services as well. We're just concerned about the city's portion and public safety as it relates to that.
Yeah, as a follow-on, I'm sorry to take up so much time. Is it possible to do things like sales tax?
No. So this gets back to the state tells us what taxes we can collect. And so we're pretty much, we can't increase the sales tax. We're pretty much at the max that we could do for utility tax. So for all the various taxes, we're pretty much...
Does UP have a sales tax?
We get a portion of the overall sales tax. So the sales tax, I believe, is about, let's say it's 10.4% or somewhere around there, and the city gets 0.85.
Yeah, because I know the sales tax is different whether you buy something in Lakewood, University Place, or Tacoma. The sales tax rates are all different.
They tend to be pretty
They're
similar, very, very, very close, and the city's portion in all of those are almost identical.
Okay. All right, thank you. Sorry to take up so much time.
Good question.
Is there any chance that the taxes would ever become variable based on single homeowner, multiple dwelling owner, business owner, that sort of thing?
I think I know the answer, but I'm going to hand it
Under Washington state law, taxes have to be uniform. So a property is a property is a property. Whether it's single family, multifamily, commercial, it's the same rate. The only exception would be low-income seniors and low-income disabled people. They have a possibility of getting reductions.
I don't know, I may not be too bright, but I'm trying to figure this numbers out here. How many actual people do you want to hire? I mean, it looks like here you've got 2 investigators and 4 patrol officers that you want to hire. Is that correct? Or you're just moving people around? I don't quite get it.
Yeah, the proposal at this point before the council is we're hiring 2 in investigations, 2 directly to patrol, 2 for traffic, so 6 total commissioned, and then that 1 community outreach officer, which is a city employee. So a total of 7 positions, 6 being commissioned law enforcement. Okay, I think over here.
This has got to be a question for you. Why was 1.7 million chosen as opposed to 1.6 or 2 million? Where did you arrive at that figure?
I made it up. No. So we know we have a contract with Pierce County. That contract tells us how much a patrol officer costs, how much an investigator costs. So that number is based off of what those contracts costs are. We also do planning, long-range planning. So we look at what the revenue is over time and what the expense is over time. Obviously, the expense grows like this. The revenue at a 1% increase every year grows like this too, but slower than the expense. So we try to do a balance so that we're not having to go back to voters every 3 years. It should be enough to carry us through. You know, obviously we can't predict the future. We don't know exactly what inflation will do to those contract costs, but we try to, as best we can, make sure that what we're asking for will pay for the services over a time period.
What are you projecting this will cover, including increases?
So this will cover us probably through mid-2030s.
Mid-2030s?
Yes. Yes.
Do you guys have a question over here? He had a hand up at one point, but I don't know.
He kind of answered the question. I guess it was mine. 2030 was the answer. I mean, how often are you going to look at this to go back to increase and increase, or is it just going to strictly be always based on the value of the property? How does that work?
Well, our taxes are assigned by the assessor, and that's always based off the value of the property. What we're trying to do is mesh the amount we're asking for with the amount it's going to cost us, and do that over a longer time period than just like a couple years. So like, I think the school and fire district go back pretty periodically. They have a different, especially the schools have a little different structure than we have, but when it comes to the finances. But we're projecting that this should get us through 2035 or so. So there will be a time when we come back, but.
Yeah, question over here.
I actually have several questions, so if do you want me to do one at a time? Do you want my notes? You can't read them. Question would be, because you guys are a contracted city, and I don't know if this will actually for you or not, Pierce County is having a problem obtaining, retaining. So what does that look like for cities that are a contract? And there's really no guarantee that our police department here through the county will exist. And what is the cost that the county is going to put on the city?
Okay, well, I think there was a couple questions even within that first question, right? So let's talk. Yeah, let's talk about hiring right now. Everybody is probably aware that there's a challenge within the law enforcement career, within the profession, to hire new recruits and even retain some. We've had quite a few that have left for maybe early retirement. So yes, we are a contract with the Sheriff's Department. So the way the contract works is the city goes to the sheriff and says, hey, next year we want to add X number of officers. The sheriff puts that into their hiring plan in terms of how many they plan to get and will allocate what they believe they can do for that year. Now, in the years past, it hasn't been an issue, right? Whatever the city would ask for, we would be able to get because there was plenty of recruits that were coming in. Like I mentioned, right now it's a challenge. I, on the other hand, am being optimistic that things are going to change within the year, that things are going to start to go back. Now, on the Sheriff's Department side specifically, the union just did a new contract, and the county came forward and gave a good contract that is helping to retain officers and is to attract new recruits. That is just now going into effect. In fact, I think it's in July that it will go into effect. If this proposal goes forward, and if we're just projecting timeline, if the council on July 18th says, yes, let's put this on the ballot, it goes on the ballot in November. If it is approved by the voters, it's a January 2023. We can make those requests, even if staffing was where it needed to be for the Sheriff's Department and there was no issue, we don't get the body right away as a part of the contract. We have to wait 10 months before you can get that body, because the sheriff is not going to withdraw a person from his staffing and bring him over to the city. The city makes the request, they put it in for hiring, takes time to hire the person, takes time to put them through the academy, go through field training. So that's why there's a 10-month kind of lag. Once that person, whoever it is hired and trained and then ready to go, then the city would get that body. So it's going to be a phased-in approach for these 6 people no matter what. But there's also a delay. Even if everything goes right along, we're still not looking at adding bodies till late 2023. But we still have to pay for that person starting January 1. As soon as we say we want somebody, you have to start paying for them, because the sheriff is paying for that person. As soon as they're on the payroll going through training and everything, the city has to pick up that tab on that person. So we're paying, and then once they're here, and then they're good to go. So yes, there's a challenge in hiring right now. I'm being optimistic that I think things are going to turn around, just like I feel like, well, I'm hoping that the economy will turn around too, right? Gas prices might come down. So being optimistic that we're going to see that, but I also, the Sheriff's Department is a department of 300. We're normally at about 350. Right now they're running at about 305. It's a much larger pool, so for a university place to ask for 2 or even all 6 is not what the sheriff is trying. He's going to be looking at hiring 20, 30 in a year. So asking for 2 to 3 each year to me is not an unreasonable request. I think I answered. Did I get both on the first one? I think so. So the contract. So yeah, the contract, we've had the contract since inception of the city. I don't think there's any desire on the part of the sheriff. I'm not speaking for the sheriff, but there's no desire to cancel the contract on the county side. And I guess I'm not really speaking for anybody but myself right here. I don't think the city is desiring canceling the contract either, so there's no really discussion of canceling it. It's been a great relationship moving forward, and I think both parties see the benefits of having the contract. So I don't know if that factors in. If for some reason there is a cancellation of the contract, there is a 18-month kind of termination clause in there that the county has to give 18 months notice, and that gives the city time to make a decision as to what they're going to do in 18 months, whether they start their own police department, and they would have to do that under their existing funds that they have dedicated to public safety, or if they look to contract with another agency if somebody was interested. Okay. I think she had another one for me.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I do have this. Can you hear me without this?
I think it's for everybody else.
Okay. And maybe you already answered this in a way, but if this levy does go on the ballot and it does get approved, and Pierce County, not University Place, but Pierce County doesn't have the staff to do it, those monies come to the UP without the benefit that you're looking for. What does that look in the big picture?
No, it's all right. So I think it's a question is like, what will we do with the money, right? We're collecting on that money right away in January 1, but yet we're not getting all of the officers right away. So we've discussed a couple of different ideas around that. So, for example, the traffic enforcement. Since we wouldn't have the physical officers dedicated to University Place in our police department, we would do I'm trying to think of the term off the top of my head now, like a pool of officers from the Sheriff's Department, maybe from Furcrest, from Lakewood, that want to work traffic enforcement in the city on a contract. So it's like hiring deputies or officers in an off-duty capacity. So if you go to the schools for a football game, you might see an officer standing out there. The city is not paying for that. The school district pays for those officers to provide that security. So utilizing some of these funds, we can have basically a pool of money that was collected for what we designed, which was traffic enforcement, create this list of officers that are wanting to work extra, so on overtime, to be able to do traffic enforcement in the city, create a schedule, have them sign up and conduct those enforcement patrols. In the meantime, until we can get our own officers on board, dedicated full-time here in the city of University Place. Because that is not to me, that's a stopgap. That's not what we want to do long-term. We want officers that are, want to work dedicated to University Place and understand the community and the culture here. So, did I answer? Okay. Did I miss something? What's that? Oh, and that the money does stay in the public safety fund. That's good. Eric just pointed out that as it stays in the fund. It can't be siphoned to go somewhere else to pay for something else. It will stay in that fund, and that would be on us. And of course, if we don't have those officers right away, that fund, it just extends that 2035 number probably out until we're able to get those officers hired. As a police chief, my concern is we keep kind of kicking the can and waiting. If we wait until we're like, okay, hiring is great, now there's a surplus of officers, now let's go to the voters, or now let's have this discussion, you're still waiting. You got to go through the whole process. Then you got to wait 10 months for another, and we're still, as you can see, our numbers are going up. The calls for service, the demand on public safety is increasing. So there is a challenge around the hiring, but I also am concerned about continuing to wait and wait and wait. We've been waiting since 2009 to restore our staffing back there. I'm gonna go. She's got.
I promise, I'm putting these together. The copies of the slides that you showed, can we get access to those? Yeah. Can we just email you that and you could send them out?
This information on the website, on that flyer that's back there, we have a website dedicated to this information.
Oh, okay. And then this gentleman touched on it a little bit about the growth of residents in our city. And this may be more for the council than yourself, so I apologize. Why is it being accepted when we don't have the staff and safety to protect what we have already, and we're constantly adding more residents?
I'm sure Eric has a good answer for that too.
Yes, we made it up. So we talked earlier about state mandates. I think maybe people have heard that we have a Growth Management Act in this state that was enacted a few decades ago. And there's a boundary drawn that says this side of the boundary is going to be urban, the other side is going to be rural. Well, obviously we live in the urban side. Every year, Office of Financial Management comes out with an estimate of what they think the population growth will be in the state and within each region. And then that goes to another layer of planning that assigns those population targets to each city. So we have no say in how many targets get assigned to us as opposed to somewhere else. And unfortunately, I don't have Kevin Brisky here, who's our planner, who can tell us the exact number, but I believe for University Place, it's like over 20,000 people we have to accommodate. And the way we have to accommodate, because the city obviously can't mandate people develop housing here and move here, is the city has to adopt zoning that allows developers to develop. The city has long, ever since pretty much the city incorporated, since the Growth Management Act came into effect, has said, the way we're going to do that is we're going to protect the single-family neighborhoods, and we're going to concentrate growth along our arterials, and we'll zone those for mixed use and multifamily housing. So it's not so much that the city council is saying, hey, you know, we just want a bunch of growth. We don't have a choice in that matter. The only choice is how do we accommodate that growth? So that's why you see a lot more apartment buildings being built now, because the market has determined that, hey, it's zoned for apartment buildings and we can actually build it and make money now. There might have been a time before where construction costs and rental income didn't justify that, but I think you can see it used to be a time period when almost all of the growth was occurring in Seattle and Bellevue, and that has slowly over time trickled out further and further and further as housing costs have gone up.
So do they determine the growth of, if it's residential, I mean, single family or multifamily zoning? Doesn't the city?
We control, the question was, can the city control whether it's single family or multifamily? Yes, but the city council has to zone enough for a certain number of housing units. It's not possible to accommodate 20,000 more people in single family zones. I suppose if we made it single family but every lot size was 3,000 square feet, we could do that. But that's just not, quote unquote protecting the single family neighborhoods. And it's not really possible to do it in a different way. So we're kind of stuck by the state again.
She took a whole bunch, I got a whole bunch, I was only going one at a time.
I was just concerned with Chambers Bay. You know, there's a lot of break-ins in the cars. I do a lot down there and walking and stuff. And I do see a UP cop sit down there sometimes. Now, does that taking him away from doing something else, or is this incorporated in his day schedule, or how does that?
Yeah, so.
Because there's break-ins, and you guys know that.
Yeah. So the questions around Chambers Bay and vehicle prowls and the presence of. Yeah, so Chambers Bay is a Pierce County park. It is not a city-owned park, but it is within the city limits of University Place. So it is as a policing, public safety, it is our responsibility. We respond there to calls. I meet with Chambers Bay Parks and the golf course people on a fairly regular basis to try and come up with some strategies around vehicle prowls specifically. To me, it's like any other business in a way, right? So Fred Meyer might be having some challenges as well, and we're going to try and work together, but they also are responsible for their own property. The UP officers that you see down there, because we know that it's a high car prowl area, when the officers don't have a call, a lot of times you'll see them drive down there, park, do their paperwork, try to be a visible presence down there, because it does get hit, especially as the weather gets nice. It's just a challenge for us. So I hope that answered that. Yes, sir.
And just real quick on follow up on a couple of questions. This is questions directly for you. But, you know, a lot of us here have been here 30, 40, and longer years. And when the city first incorporated, if I remember correctly, it's one thing that's failing on me, but if I remember correctly, they said that they would not increase the multifamily units. And they've steadily done so every year since their inception. So a lot of these people are asking about the differences in the taxes because of the multifamilies and the single families. And so my question primarily is, since the city has chosen to change their opinion on these multifamily units since they became a city, and they're constantly adding more multifamily units, how long do these multifamily units have, I don't know what the right term is, where they don't have to, where they're incentivized to build these units and they're kept at a low tax rate, so they're not paying an equal share of these taxes that the single family homeowner is paying?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Two things I want to once again clarify, that the city really doesn't have much of a choice but to zone for multifamily housing. So it's not so much the city council is advocating for it. What the city council has done, and what you're talking about is called a multifamily tax exemption, and that's for 10 years for the housing portion of a development. A multifamily mixed-use project wouldn't have to pay property taxes. And the city council has done that for a few projects, and the way that generally works is, how do I describe this? So it will be kind of a negotiation in terms of, we want more from you in exchange for you not having to do this. Sometimes it may involve open space areas. A lot of times it involves design. So one way in which the city council has to accept multifamily housing, but what we've tried to do is say, well, we want it to be a better design than some cheap stuff that might get developed somewhere else, because we realize this building's going to be here a long time. And so we want to make sure that it doesn't become a slum over time, basically. And so that has been a compromise that has taken place. And Amanda, you might have a chart showing multifamily. This is from the email from Matt. Okay, so that's not it. It's not it either. That's the answer. That is the answer. We're done. So, this was an email, Amanda. It shows an example. So what the city council, and if you can make it a lot bigger, and we'll scroll our way down.
Multi-family tax exemption is 8 years.
Oh, it's 8 years, not 10. Okay. So this is an example. This is a site off of Bridgeport that's been a vacant site for quite a while. So one of the things that the city council asked us to do is say, okay, what's the tax implications of doing these sorts of tax exemptions? So you see current site, proposed development. You see the assessed value of the site beforehand and then afterwards. And then obviously these are some of the taxes we receive: sales tax, utility tax, state shared revenue, and those are ongoing. And you see what those taxes would be after the development. So as you scroll down, you see that the city is a positive number during that, even within that 8-year period. If you taking away the property tax, it still is a positive number for the city during that period of time. So the city isn't, quote unquote, losing money, even though they're giving this tax exemption, because there are other taxes that we'll be receiving.
Well, it just seems to me that the single-family property owner is carrying the load until these other entities come into play where they're balancing out and help pay that. Don't get me wrong. Personally, myself, I have 6 cops in my family. We're big supporters of law enforcement. We're behind law enforcement 100%. That's not the issue. The issue is the overburden on the single-family property owners on these high taxes.
So, and we had that chart before which showed the average house and how much it pays the city. Not how much it pays every other tax entity, how much it pays the city. And it was $408 or something like that, $400. That's not very much.
That's not the issue.
You're saying the call for...
Taxes that are added on top of it.
Agreed. We're here to talk about the cities.
Look at that line that's paying for school
Yep. The line that people voted for to pay for schools, and which is an important, don't get me wrong, schools, very important. Fire, EMS, very important. Police, very important.
6% to 36%. That's a huge disparity.
Yeah, I mean, I think every taxpayer has to evaluate what they think is important to them when they're talking about increasing their taxes. So I can just answer the factual questions for you. I can't evaluate for you whether this is worth it or not.
I just think that kind of goes back to the question where the people, the renters in these multifamily units, they can vote. And they're going to schools, and they're voting for schools, but they're not paying the fair tax burden.
And I would disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're getting it passed on through the apartment complexes passing those increases on. I think the other thing that was kind of highlighted on that chart too, that I wasn't aware of this until maybe a year ago, was the sales tax implications of multifamily. So purchases made online, the sales tax is retained within the city because it's where you made the purchase. So, you know, if you have a single family that's purchasing a multifamily, you're thinking of an apartment complex, that's a lot more sales tax revenue that comes. Although we only get a small portion of the sales tax, but at least it's some. Yes, sir.
And I don't want to monopolize it, but as he was talking and other issues came up, do you know the breakdown of the percentage of calls that y'all have to respond to, regardless of what they are, that are perpetrated by homeowners who are residents of the city versus non-homeowners that are residents of the city?
No, we don't break it down by home ownership. And we certainly can't do calls for service. What I have looked at within the last year and a half was data on arrests. So when we make an arrest, there's obviously an official report that's made, and then it gets the address of the individual that we arrested. And roughly, it's like 58% of the people that we have arrested in University Place are not residents of University Place. They're either a transient or homeless status, or they list an address outside of the city of University Place.
Coming into University Place.
Correct.
To commit that crime, whatever
Correct.
it may be, like.
And certainly,
Catalytic converter.
certainly a vast majority, and I would say that's what we make arrests for. So that could be any type of incident, right? Whether it's a domestic violence incident, that person doesn't even live here, they're visiting and they get in a fight. But and I would say that the number is actually much higher than that. That the residents are not the ones that are committing the crimes.
Okay, and you brought up the one about things like domestic violence and things like that. Again, same type of a question. Do you know what percentage of, say, those types of calls that you're responding to come from somebody who owns the property that they're residing in versus somebody that does not?
No, home ownership is never a question that we ask in terms of, because I mean, even you can rent a house, and so we would be making a judgment call on that. We don't ask those types of questions. It doesn't come into play.
So you don't have any statistics on that?
No, not. What? I did put up your slide there. Oh, so around apartments, so this question has come up, and this was actually done last spring in response to some of the questions around these developments. So I took 5 apartment complexes in the city and looked at the calls for service from 2016 through 2020. And we averaged basically 1 call to 2 calls per unit over that 5-year period. And then I took a neighborhood that had 135 homes in it, single-family homes, and looked at the number of calls for service in there, and we had 0.9, so just about 1 call. So it's pretty close in terms of whether it's a multifamily versus a single-family. If it's a housing unit, generates about the same number of calls for service. The difference is multifamily, I'm going to have 135 in a small little section, and then I'm going to have another 135, and then I'm going to have so I mean, I can have a street that gets a lot more attention from public safety, but it's not the housing units that generate more calls. When I looked at this, also did this quick survey, there is an element to socioeconomic status too. So if it's a lower, like Section 8 housing, those typically generate a little bit more calls. For whatever reason, it's just, that's the way it is. If it's a lower income apartment complex, they'll generate a little bit more calls. That would be the 2 versus the 1. So not necessarily a vast, difference. Sure.
And someone asked us this question recently. Almost all of the new housing that's been developed here recently, the multifamily housing, is market rate housing, not low income housing. So. Which means what? Well, as he was talking about, it wouldn't. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not lower income Section 8 housing, it's market rate, so it's going to be a little bit higher end cost, which, again, looking at comparisons to existing complexes and the amount of calls for service, we projected less calls for service for those areas. And again, we're looking at, some of these other developments of like 27th and Grandview and what we can do there because of what that property does on a public safety standpoint. Even though the property is vacant, and you might not all think that it generates public safety, but it does generate calls for service from public safety, even when it's a vacant, dilapidated building. Yeah. We've got a team out here.
Yeah, I just want to point out that since city inception, we have worked really closely. We have about 40% of our housing and rental. We've worked to establish relationships with those management teams, and we work regularly at assisting them with chronic issues, developing a partnership, problem solving. We host crime-free multi-housing classes here at the PD. We do twice a year before COVID anyways. We have really robust partnership, and I'd say probably one of the most premier in Pierce County. I'm not partial or anything, but I would say we have other cities and areas, including Pierce County, looking to us to develop similar programs. So.
Thanks, Jennifer. Yeah, questions?
Well, I just want to make sure I'm clear. So if this is improved, so this is just the property tax, and so it is, the police, is that strictly funded just by the property tax here at UP?
Correct.
There's no other source, because now you're talking about all the construction and all the other money from, internet sales or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I see, that revenue goes to the city, but that is not going to the police.
So that property tax exemption only applies to the housing component. So.
No, I'm not talking about the exemption.
Okay. In general?
In general.
So police is funded primarily by property tax. That's the number one thing. Yep. There's a portion of the utility tax that goes to police. Okay. And then there's a portion of various state shared revenues that go to it. The vast majority of it is property tax, though.
Okay. Yeah.
I'll hog it for a while. Okay. Questions I have, because he opened it up. He took my second paragraph. Were you peeking at me? Hack into my account to see what it said? Now, if I understood correctly, regardless of whether it's Section 8, high-end, multifamily, they're going to get 10 years free from property tax. Is that what you were saying? You said something about the housing units. When I get my tax statement, the dirt's worth something and the dwelling's worth something. Is the same thing for an apartment? I got more. So.
I'll bring it
back. So it's not all development. It's particular projects within particular locations that qualify for that exemption. And it is not all of this is under that exemption, I don't believe. Matt, our city attorney, could tell us. But the commercial portion is not exempt. The land is not exempt. It's just the housing component.
Okay,
and so if
there's no commercial, then it's 100% exempt except for the land.
And almost all of these projects have a commercial component. It's usually for mixed use development. And don't know if we want to bring up that chart again, but it would show you that, like, for example, the new one that's being built down here, they showed you what the land value was, just raw land, and then still how much we would get in property taxes, even just on the commercial portion and the land portion. It's substantially more than what it is just as dirt.
Okay, maybe I should get you closer and we just hand the mic back and forth. Now, the 6 cents picture you have, is that all the taxes that come out of property taxes?
That's all property taxes.
Okay, so for his question here, all of those, it looks like all those monies that you listed for these exempt for 10 years, they're not going to go to property. You're talking about sales tax, other things like that. Isn't that what you were alluding to? Yeah, so you're saying that goes to fund other functions in the city. It's not fed back into public safety, correct?
So, again, if you look at the raw dirt, what we collect from this vacant lot in property taxes that goes to police versus what we're going to get from the raw dirt plus the commercial portion, that is more than before. So yes, for that 8-year period, we're not getting the housing portion, but the land and the commercial portion is more. And that all goes to public safety. Yes, and all those other 8 years, it's 8 years.
8 years, all of a sudden, all of those multifamilies are going to start paying for housing units.
Correct.
Okay, so their assessment's going to be jacked up. That means more revenue.
Correct.
So you're going to have more revenue in 8 years, yet you're trying to put this levy out for 15 years.
So we
Following the chief's optimism, it seems like you may have a big windfall of monies then that would impact how we're dealing with this right now.
Yes, and I plan on retiring in 8 years because that windfall is coming to me. and so no. So the answer to that question is we try to account for all of that because remember, collectively, the city gets what, $4+ million a year in property taxes. These very individual projects, even a multifamily project, is not generating enough to pay for one officer. So it's really the collective that is helping. So yes, we will get more money in 8 years when that exemption expires. All of that new money goes into the public safety fund. When we do our forecasting, we try to account for these tax exemptions and when they come back on the tax rolls. So when I say easily through 2035, this levy should, if it was approved by voters and presented to voters and then approved by voters, that includes accounting for these exemptions that we've given. We haven't given very many, so it's not like we can't just add that up. But it's all a forecast, and there are a lot of variables in that. For example, if our contract costs with the county goes up by more than what we're forecasting, if we have some sort of recession, there are all sorts of variables in that over that long period of time. It is a long time to forecast, but we just try to do the best we can. But all the property tax goes to public safety, whether it comes now or comes later.
I think what at least bothers me and may bothers others, when you talk about forecast, there was a forecast about what town center was going to do to the community, and that fell flat on its face. So your forecasting, not you personally, is difficult to swallow sometime, and I think that's part of why you've got a 1% cap now, because either by initiative or referendum, the citizens said a while ago, we don't want you getting 6% every year because you're wasting it. So that's why you've got the 1%, right?
Well, and so the question is, do we have the
make that up?
Do we have the 1% because statewide residents said they felt like government was wasteful? Perhaps, but the bottom line is that we have costs for services, and we all make this evaluation. At some point, we want this service, we don't want this service, right? So we have costs for services. those costs grow at a, generally speaking, at an inflationary basis. That inflationary basis tends not to be 1%. So ultimately we come to a point where you make the decision, well, I want fewer services because I can't afford, to pay more for it. I can't afford a new tax increase. What the 1% did was basically it forces all governments to go back to voters. So at some point we have to go back to voters and say, hey, we want more. It doesn't say that you're going to continue to get the same services for the same amount that you're currently paying.
Such a long distance. Question about the COO who's looking, and you say it's a city employee. What's the significance of calling that person a city employee?
It's not a part of the contract. So it's not through the sheriff, it's not an employee of the sheriff's department. This city gets to make the hire and it's on the city payroll.
Okay, and what does the public safety manager do? Hi. What do you do, and can you pick up some of the duties that are supposedly going to be assigned to the COO?
Yes, I would be more than likely supervising the COO. I'm also the city's emergency manager.
I want somebody who rolls their sleeves up.
Well, we could probably have an offline conversation if you want. I mean, I don't want to hijack this meeting to discuss.
Anybody object?
Yes.
This is about the police right now,
Well,
not Jennifer's job.
Well, but if she's public safety, isn't that what police are? Do you
Yeah.
liaison with the police department?
Yes, I work and Greg and I share a door.
Okay, are you a city employee?
I am
or
a
you
city
under
employee.
Contract?
I'm a city employee,
Okay,
part-time city employee. I manage the public safety contracts and the emergency manager for the city. I also liaise between the 40% of the apartment complexes that we've discussed here today. I work with all of them.
I just wanted to know, okay, here's the other question that I have, I think, in terms of, and you brought it up for visibility and optics. Why are we stopping at 6 hires and not going to 8? Based upon the current contract, you can have 8 FTEs from Pierce County, and you're still having money left over at 1.7 million. And doesn't 8 people out there benefit us greater than the 6? And in terms of not having the COO, which is going to come to these lesser events, how about the optics of having a uniformed officer in a police car show up? The community sees that, and the bad guys see that because they see you're out and about. So you said visibility, I use the term optics. And why not go for the whole enchilada and go with 8 FTEs? Wouldn't you like 8 FTEs? Sure. Okay, well then, are you going to advocate on behalf of 8 FTEs based on this levy?
You're right, I would love 8. In fact, I'd love maybe 10. But as you can see, we're already having quite the conversation around taxes and the cost of all of this and what it costs moving forward. And I think the 1.7 number, I think, is the average and also it's covering us going forward as those costs increase. So it may not be 1.7 in the first year, but we're averaging it out for the rest going forward. So yeah, I mean, I think for us, and I want to say also that the council hasn't made a decision. There is still consideration from the council as to what the final will be in terms of the request to if it goes on the ballot and what it will look like, and then how many officers we are having. This was, to me, the staffing that we needed right now to address not only the immediate concerns, but the current kind of future as the way things are trending. It addresses those in a reasonable, in my opinion, cost. The COO, what we're calling that community outreach officer position, it's about half the cost of a fully commissioned officer. So again, it's back to that component of it. The second is, you're right that the bad guys seeing a police officer and how that has an impact on them, but the idea is this person isn't dealing with quote, bad guys. They're dealing with people that are maybe in a crisis in some sort. They're panhandling. It's that homeless outreach. It's somebody that has that ability to take the time to address that because it's an ongoing issue. That person has come to Green Firs every other weekend, and we need to do some sort of interdiction. It is not a criminal nature. It is more of a crisis intervention that we're trying to provide that service. So to me, it seems like a good balance. It's taking away from sending that officer to that type of a call and making sure they're available for what we really need on the 911 end. I can understand your point. I think it's a valid point. I've heard a lot of people that have been supportive of the idea of having this level of response from the city just as much as well. So I'm sure you got to follow up.
But you talked one time about examples of other resources within the community that this COO would recommend to. I'm not aware of what kind of resources you have.
Well, for example, there's a program called PATH. So this is a homeless outreach that runs out of Greater Lakes Mental Health, and they're stationed out of Lakewood, but they service all of Pierce County. So, and we work with them already in terms of the officers do when we come across people that are experiencing homelessness. But those are the types of examples, whether it's mental health services that are available, substance abuse resources that are available, that homeless thing, connecting them. And again, it's taking the time. I think what gets overlooked is, and I'm speaking from a patrol officer on a call, we're like an ER. If you're going to the emergency room because you need something fixed right then and there, and you need the Band-Aid, everything applied, and then you're going to a specialist. Our patrol officers are going and addressing a problem right then and there. They're doing what they can to mitigate and fix things. They're not going to necessarily have the time to think about the follow-up and the referrals and checking back the next day on that person. And that's what we're trying to accomplish here, is having somebody that has that freedom, that time to be able to do that, to address those issues, make the connections, and make sure the connections happen to try and get those people connected.
Not to take away from him, but because I got a cop question, and since you went there, and I was waiting to ask this, because of the low staffing, I think you just kind of said that. Because of the low staffing, are you able to do all the things that you would like to do with instances? For example, we recently had someone sleeping in our neighborhood with a knife stuck next to them. When the police officer came out, unfortunately, I had to go to church with my wife. I wasn't there, but our neighbor was. The cop asked the individual to leave. So I guess my question is, when an officer goes to a call where there is a weapon, is it their procedure to run a background check on this individual? Obviously, if they have an open weapon, and they don't have a concealed carry permit, or for example, should they be looked into farther, or are they just telling them to go about their business? You understand the question?
Yeah, I think I do. And there's a lot of nuances to the calls like that, right? So I think the thing you have to remember from the beginning is there a crime being committed? We don't have the right to just go up to any individual and say, hey, let me see your ID. I want to check your background because you have a knife next to you. We can't do that. I mean, I can ask if they want to give it to me, and then I can conduct that in a very, take their ID, take their information, give them their ID back. But if they're not committing a crime, it's what we call a social contact. We can go up and talk to them, say, hey, what's going on today, and why are you here? But they don't have to cooperate. They're not committing a crime. If they're trespassing, you said they were sleeping in the neighborhood. If it was somebody's private property and they were refusing to leave, now you have a different issue. But if it's just somebody sleeping on the side of the road, it's what we call a welfare check. We're going to go up and check on them and see what kind of services that the officer can provide to them. Maybe there's a medical issue, maybe there's a mental health, but it's a conversation. It's not an investigation to them. It's not illegal to have a knife necessarily on your person. There are some elements of dangerous weapons, but it has to be brandished in some way and something like that. We're an open carry state. I don't have to have a concealed pistol license to carry a handgun on my hip. If it's concealed, then we have to have a permit to do that. But so I think I answered. Hopefully, I got your question. It's just there's so many little nuances. There's no crime being committed. The officers are just connecting with them and trying to see if they're going to cooperate and have a conversation about it. We don't necessarily, if he's able to get that information, I would expect an officer is doing a little bit of a background check to see, hey, do I need to be concerned about this guy? Maybe they have warrants for their arrest or something like that. Yeah.
In defense of this resource person, or I don't have to see.
Yeah,
who-
the community outreach officer.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. I mean, I think that's exactly what we need, and police have taken on more and more responsibilities, the homelessness, the drugs, and this is to mitigate that kind of a situation, to help mitigate. And that's what that whole defund the police was about, was adding these resources to help mitigate the crime and what's going on.
And another component that I really want to stress is that's a key component to it, and also just the crime prevention outreach. One of the things that Jennifer didn't talk about in her job is she does some of that with the apartment complex managers and doing some of that intervention there. But we want to have somebody that has that time to go meet with Green Furs businesses and talk about what they're experiencing and identify ways that we can prevent some of the criminal stuff, meet with homeowners associations. And we do that already. Jennifer and I do it as much as we can, but having somebody that's here during the day to meet with business owners on a regular basis and be that conduit to patrols, what I'm hoping to accomplish with that position. Any other hands up? Nope. Oh, go ahead, man.
So will the next meeting be the same, or is it going to be different?
No, that's a good question. Actually, yes. This is the second public listening forum we've had. We are doing 3 total. For the most part, they're the same. I'm presenting the same information. It's just an opportunity for more conversation. Yeah, around that. Yes, sir.
For me, and probably for a lot of others, the issue isn't public safety and law enforcement. It's the property taxes and the finance part of it.
Yeah.
So how creative can you get in raising the needed funds for that to lessen the impact on us as a property owner?
Well, as I think I mentioned earlier, what taxes we can impose, all taxes, are dictated by the state. There aren't other taxes that aren't voter approved that we could impose. So if voters, we had, 2016, we went to voters and said, will you do a utility tax to pay for this? We dedicate it to public safety. Voters voted no. Now we're coming to you and say, will you do a property tax to pay for public safety? So any new revenue would have to basically be approved by voters. There aren't a lot of other magic things.
Here's just one example. The parking garage. Can you charge for parking there?
So, yeah.
I'm just throwing stuff out
Right.
to say, okay, what sticks to the wall? I don't
Right.
know.
So, yes, there probably are a host of little things that we could do that probably wouldn't add up to one officer.
Okay,
But,
and I don't know what the
but let me tell you one thing. So
implications
the garage that's under that building is not owned by us. It's owned by the apartment developer. So no parking money coming from that. And then the one over here, the apartment building, basically leases part of it for their residents, right? The one here in the middle, the library district owns part of it. So there aren't, there's a lot of complicated factors.
Okay, how
Yes,
creative.
yes.
What are the other
Trust me,
sources you could
between following 2009 till now 2022, we have used up all of our creative magic, right? We are simply trying to, with our existing revenues, trying to maintain what we have. That itself is a challenge. Adding something new, there is no new potential revenue source that we have available.
And I guess my last, maybe last comment. It's thinking about staffing, and the question is just, the community just needs to make a decision as to whether or not, obviously the council needs to make a decision first, but it goes to you as what do you want to pay for? We're at 16 commissioned staff in the city of 35,000. That's 0.45 officers per 1,000. We have the lowest staffing in the state for commissioned staff. The average for communities of our size is about 1.19 officers per 1,000. So I'm not advocating that number. There is no one magic formula that says this is how many officers we should have. Every community is different. The level of challenges and safety within communities are different. So I'm just thinking that as your chief, it was something that I needed to bring to the council's attention, and they overwhelmingly said this was a priority to investigate, and this is a part of our process, is getting feedback from the community as to what they want and understanding what the costs are and what the challenges are as we're facing in terms of public safety. Yes, sir. Wait, are you sure?
Yes, I you got somebody else. Who?
Oh, you couldn't bail me out?
Okay. Hopefully just the last area. You mentioned the 12 or the 10-month training period. Somebody goes to Pierce County and says, we want 6 commissioned officers.
Yes.
Okay, so starting in January 1st, you're going to be taking taxpayer monies to pay for that. They actually appear on November the 1st, give or take, whatever that means. Okay, so then from there. Now, what happens if Pierce County says, we're having a heck of a time, we can give you 3. So you're taking taxes for 6. What are you going to do with that other monies? Is that going to help backfill the 6 cents property tax that already exists for the existing police force? Or are you allowed to put this in a rainy day fund such that we can see, okay, this was monies from the 1.7 we couldn't spend because Pierce couldn't give it to us, and it's going to be left alone until we get those other officers, and people aren't going to be nickel and diming away from that to backfill to your existing department.
Yeah, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier. We have a couple options. One, all the funds are dedicated to the public safety fund. So this increase is going to go into the fund, and that 2035 number will just get pushed out because there will be more money in the fund up front that we couldn't spend. However, we have other ideas in terms of doing some mitigation where we don't have the full-time officers on the payroll here, utilizing those funds to create a traffic enforcement unit that is made up of officers from other agencies that we are having come in to perform those functions that we want here in the city. Probably not, because then we have to pay them overtime, so time and a half for those officers to come in here. And it certainly
time after they've done their 35 or 40 hours with their current, or you're looking at some of your current employees who are going to want it.
Well, I would say majority are probably going to come from the outside. We're so short-staffed here that my officers are working the overtime that is created within our own agency on regular patrol, because we have 2 officers working on duty at a time. I only have 4 assigned to each shift. So those 4 day shift officers are covering 7 days a week. And as soon as one of them has to go on sick, vacation, or training, that's an overtime shift that the other ones are trying to pick up and cover. So the majority will probably come from outside agencies that we will manage here internally, but as I said earlier, it is not the model that we would want moving forward. We wanted university place officers.
The dollars and cents, it's $190K right now
for a deputy.
Pierce County,
Yeah.
and that includes
everything.
Weaponry, car, all that. Now, these other people coming in, are they going to be using your vehicles, or are they bringing vehicles with them?
No, they'll be bringing their vehicles with them.
Okay, and you have to pay anything for the vehicles?
That would be negotiated with the other. So if let's say we used Lakewood officers and we opened it up, we would have to have an agreement with them, and it would be negotiated as to whether or not Lakewood, the city of Lakewood, is going to want some sort of compensation for the vehicles being used.
Are those people as part-time employees, are they going to take as much money out as if they were the real thing? And if they aren't taking as much out, where does the surplus go?
Like I said, all stays in the public safety fund.
But that doesn't say where it goes. Is it backfilling against your
Chief,
current department?
No,
I
it's-
have a question, and I have to go, so I apologize. I don't
Oh,
have to.
you don't need this.
Could you please, Jen, could you bring that slide up on the increase in crime since 2019? So by my estimation, looking at, that's what, a
Yeah.
45% increase since 2019?
Yeah.
19, it's more than that. So
Yeah,
it's
it's over
675,
700.
so it's.
So 700's probably
So
got to be
about
close to
70%.
75%,
75% increase in crime?
give or take.
Yeah.
And what was the cost per year for homeowners to have more police?
So we're looking at $168 total under the current proposal.
Perfect. That's all I wanted to know.
Okay. There it is.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. What are we at? Hour and 40 minutes?
I need to go.
Wow. Well, well, maybe I'll just cut it off right there. And if you have any questions at the end, I'll be here if you want to just do some one-on-one. That's fine. Thank you so much for being here. Like I said, there's one more session. It'll be kind of the same basic thing, but if you have your neighbors that haven't had a chance or you want to share it with them, feel free to join us on July 14th at 6 o'clock, same bat channel, same bat place. All right, thank you.